So next game we're going to go over is the game between Max Euwe and George Allen Thomas. This game goes c4 e6, c4 e6, knight c3, d5 d4, knight to f6, bishop to g5. Oh, this guy has 3 first names. Yeah, George Allen Thomas. True. Three first names. Yeah. So this game starts out with c4, but it does transpose back into the Queen's Gambit declined, one of the most common openings in the game of chess. So e3 castles, knight to c3 played here, and now George plays Mr. Thomas plays knight b to d7, rook to c1, c6 played here. Now, those of you who have seen this opening probably will note that this was played very recently in the qualification stage of the latest Meltwater Champions Chess Tour event, the FTX Crypto Cup, between Wesley So and Alireza Firouzja. Now, in that game and a lot of recent games, Black normally plays pawn to c5, and Black is considered to be doing okay here. So, in this game, c6 is played. Now, Euwe plays bishop d3. D takes c4. So very old things are still being played. Yes, a lot of these openings, they've been refined over time, but they are still the main variations. So I would say things like the Queen's Gambit decline, they've probably been the most common openings for probably since about 1900 or 1910. No, I was watching Levy broadcast my games. Okay, well, to each their own, obviously, but I would say that basically that's what you get. So you see these openings that remain very, very topical and popular even now. So d takes c4, bishop c4, knight d5 is played here. Now, what we've learned in more modern times is that when you have the black piece in the Queen's Gambit decline, normally you're trying to push the pawns on c5 and e5, and this actually harkens back to another game I went over of Jose Raul Capablanca, where he won a game. I believe it was against was it against Aliekin? I think it was. Also very similar opening like this in the Queen's Gambit declined. So bishop takes e7, queen e7 castles, knight c3, rook c3. Now, in the game that I went over of the Capablanca game, I think Black failed to get an either c5 or e5. Now, in modern times, of course, we've learned that these moves are necessary, but in that Capablanca game, it wasn't known. But in this game, however, Thomas does play e5. He does know that it's the correct move. So takes. And now here White plays a very committal move, and it's very similar to the last game I showed between Euwe and Aliekin, where there was a position where Aliekin played pawn to f5. So in this game, Euwe plays f4. Very, very committal move, but at the same time, it shows a very, very deep understanding positionally, because what happens is that when Black moves the queen back to e7, White plays f5. And the reason this is a very strong positional concept is because in this position, if Black can get the bishop out to e6 or f5, potentially, Black will be equal, if not even maybe slightly better here, due to the backward pawn on e3. Whereas, like, say, for example, if White goes here and you get this position, the pawn chain is in order. But when you push the pawn here, you end up with the structure where this pawn is permanently weak, because this pawn on f4 cannot support the pawn on e3. So after queen e7, f5 is played here by Euwe, and the point again is that you close the diagonal. The rook guards the pawn, so you can't take, but you also can't put the bishop on e6 because then my pawn will capture. And additionally, now your bishop on c4 permanently will be eyeing this diagonal towards this diagonal from a2 to g8, where the bishop on c4 is always going to be keeping an eye on the pawn on f7 and the king on g8. So b5 is played here by Thomas, the idea being now, well, I can't develop my bishop on this diagonal, so if I can't develop it this way, I got to get this rook into the game. So how do I do it? And then just to add one line, let's say Black were to play bishop d7 here. This actually is I think, very bad, because I believe White can play e4, and you can't take the pawn because you lose the bishop. And additionally, I have ideas like swinging the rook to g3, maybe pawn to f6, and it should be quite unpleasant for Black. So Thomas plays b5, idea being that he figures, well, I can't develop this way, so if I can't put the bishop on this diagonal, well, then I'm going to put it here, and eventually I want to maybe go c5, open up this diagonal, but also I want to connect the rooks in the center of the board. So here Euwe goes bishop to b3, Thomas plays b4, Euwe plays pawn to f6. Again, a brilliant move here. The only move after which White is better, because as you guys see from the eval bar, if White were to say take the pawn on c6, you think, well, White's up a pawn. Problem is Black can now play the in-between move, bishop to b7, target the juicer on c6, and when you move the rook, I just then take your pawn on e3 here, because you have to move the rook, and there's no way to guard the pawn on e3. So when you come back, I take, And now you could play like king h1 here, but what you'll notice is that the black bishop now is very strong on this diagonal from a8 to h1, where it targets the pawn on g2 and the king on h1, very similarly to how the white bishop on b3 targets f7 and g8 here. So black would be completely fine. So here Euwe plays pawn to f6, Thomas takes, and now Euwe plays rook takes pawn. And the difference is that, let's go back here, if you were to take and play f6 first, I could take with check, king moves, and I eat your rook. So by playing f6 first, you force black to take, and now when you take back, if black goes bishop to b7, then you just take the pawn. And now you're very happy because you're really putting pressure on this f7 pawn. A lot of pressure from the rooks and the bishop on b3. So after takes, queen takes e3 is played, king h1, bishop b7, rook takes f6. And now here Thomas plays queen to e4, trying to create some counterplay again. You know you're going to lose this pawn on f7, but you do have this long diagonal which is completely open from b7 down towards h1. So Thomas plays queen to e4, Euwe goes queen to d2, guarding the pawn with the queen, but additionally creating ideas like queen to g5 check, and then maybe rook f7. So like, let's say black goes a5, you can go check here, or actually wait, no, it doesn't quite work in this order. So let's say a5, you can go rook f7, takes, and now you take, and the idea is queen g5 and queen g7 checkmate. So instead, king h8 is played here by Thomas. Euwe goes bishop takes pawn. Now this move I think is actually not the best move. I think the computer's kind of critical of it, or I thought it was. Maybe after a deep think it likes it actually, but bishop takes f7 is played here. So Thomas plays rook c8. Again, the idea being that, you know, the king is kind of safe for the moment. If you could magically move this rook, there would be some kind of idea. There would be some ideas to check on the dark square diagonal. But for the moment, the king is safe. So black basically has a free move to try and do something. And so Thomas plays rook c8. And the idea after rook c8 is black wants to go rook c2, where the queen guards the rook, and then you're gonna have big problems because black's gonna win on this, win something here on g2 at the very least if he gets to play rook c2. So after rook c8, Euwe plays rook f2. Again, a very nice positional move which shows great understanding. No fear, no worry. I mean, you have to be scared of the diagonal, but very calmly guards the pawn on g2 with the rook. Also guards against rook c2 because now you have the queen and the rook protecting against this. So it's like a triple function move. It holds the c2 square, it holds the g2 square, but it also keeps an eye on f7. And additionally, now there are ideas where you can maybe move the queen and try to make some checks on the dark square diagonal and checkmate the king on h8. So rook c d8 is played by Thomas. Now Euwe goes queen g5. As I said, the idea now is queen f6 checkmate. Thomas plays rook d6, and now Euwe plays a really nasty move. He plays bishop to d5, and here and here Thomas resigns. Now Thomas resigns for a couple of reasons. First of all, if black plays rook takes rook here, you go queen to g8 checkmate. Bishop on d5 guards the queen. If black takes back with, say, the bishop, you just take the rook with check. Bishop to g8, queen takes g8, which is checkmate. So black can't take the rook, black can't take the bishop, but additionally there are two rooks stacked. So even if you go queen e8, I take with the rook and my other rook guards from f1 and it's checkmate. So after bishop to d5 with a very nice fossil by Euwe, Thomas resigns this game. So this I think is what Euwe was very good at throughout his career, was very, very good at playing these sort of positional games, things that seem very ho-hum. I mean, it just seems like a very ho-hum, very quiet opening, not much going on. But then again, this one slight inaccuracy, this e5 move, and Euwe very quickly shows very good positional understanding with f4, f5, and just takes over and dominates the entire game. Very, very clean game again, but you start to see shades of future world champions in this game.